Erik,
What's up?
20 years.
20 years.
20 years ago, you were a 25-year-old young man who had always wanted to be in ministry. You wanted to start your own church. You finally got the opportunity. That's a total lie.
Yes, it is.
Where were you 20 years ago? Who was Erik Reed? What was going on in your life? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, not planting a church, that was never on the radar, ever. Yet, at 25 years old, found myself in the middle of being a part of planting a church and leading the charge on that. And to get to that point, though, the Lord had to do a lot of work in me. And not just in, obviously, bringing me to faith and growing my faith, giving me a passion and heart for the church. One of the things that the Lord had to kind of overcome as a hurdle for me was my vision and paradigm of a pastor. I had always grown up going to small little country church when I went, and the pastors there, God love them, were nice and kind and loved the Lord, but they wore suits everywhere they went. They talked.
You don't like suits?
They talked like pastors. I just remember the paradigm for me was like, as I was even having any hints of wrestling with, man, could I see myself being a pastor of a church, like helping teach the Bible to people and bringing people into a community that was growing in their faith. The biggest hurdle I had to come over was not, is that something I would like to be doing? It was, can I be that?
Right.
And so I was hesitant for a lot of years to even let myself even entertain that. And the Lord was gracious. I finally just put my yes on the table for ministry years before we planted, even though I still didn't know what that meant. I certainly didn't know that would mean pastoring a church. But I was at a conference where it was a leadership conference. There were pastors and business leaders. And this pastor was up there, and he was in blue jeans, and he was in a shirt, just a normal shirt. And he was normal, and he was funny. And I was just like, hold up, he's a pastor? I didn't think pastors could
exist.
I didn't think you could dress that way or have that kind of personality and be funny and humorous and be yourself.
Yeah.
And it was the first time for me, I was like, well, if that's a pastor, I might be willing and able to do that. If I'm just able to be me.
Right.
And so I found myself at 25 planting a church. I've overcome that hurdle. And in my mind's eye, it's like, hey, there needs to be a church that's different from everything that people know as church in this area. And I don't mean that as a knock against churches, but
right.
in Lebanon, there had been no church plants in eons.
Right.
Right. Literally decades. And the first thing we heard even from some associations in this area was, oh, there's enough churches here already. We don't need a new church.
Right.
So we just saw ourselves as starting something for people who maybe didn't have a permanent landing place, and people, though, who are open and interested to learn about Jesus, maybe but didn't feel like they fit in the kinds of churches that maybe they'd always or only been exposed to.
Right. What did your family dynamic look like then? You and Katrina were young, right?
We were young.
And Caleb had just been born. Walk through that, because that was a huge, obviously a huge moment in a new child, but also all the complications that came with that.
Yeah, Caleb was just a year old or close to a year old when we were even beginning the process of, getting a core group together and starting core group gatherings. And in 2005, that core group gathering in the summer, Caleb was a year old, which means he was right in the middle of needing a kidney transplant. He had his kidneys removed by accident. We were kind of thrown into this whole new world of trying to make sense of where's God in the midst of suffering. And,
yeah,
so we're planting a church alongside of walking day by day, not knowing what our son's health would be. And crazy enough, we're like, hey, we ought to still try to plant a church in the middle of all this.
Right. What was Katrina's initial reaction to you saying, I think we're going to plant a church?
Her first response was, can we do that?
Like legally?
Yeah.
Really?
Are we allowed to do that? I just thought churches had always been. I thought they've just always been here. Are you allowed to quote unquote start a church?
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, like there's this whole world out there where, there's a big initiative and big push to plant more churches, to plant new churches. And new churches reach people that aren't currently being reached. And so her response was like, I didn't even know you could do that. And then it was an openness. Like the thing about Katrina has always, been, and I just think about our whole journey of the 20 years at TJC, is Katrina's just always had a posture of, if the Lord's in it, then I'm along for the ride. Just don't make me get on stage and talk.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask that. So many pastors' wives have different roles, and some are really out front. Some I've seen sit in every service on the front row in support of their man on stage, and some are behind the scenes. What has Katrina's role been throughout these 20 years?
Yeah, she's always done what has been needed to be done from her. And so in the early years, she was somebody that helped with kids a lot. And she was somebody that, just was open to, opening up our home to invite people in to talk about being a part of the church, or, just being there to support me when I'm having lots of meetings and having to go to, training development, conferences or boot camps or whatever they were doing. She's always been naturally behind the scenes, never out front leading, trying to, take the center stage or, have the baton. But one of the things I'll say is that she's always been incredibly supportive to say, if you believe the Lord's in it, I'm behind you. And then just really like being a warm person, not just by opening up our home with hospitality, but just being a friend to people, just being somebody that anybody can come and talk to.
Right.
And she's just warm to them. And so I would say that's kind of been her role. And I've never like forced upon her kind of a pastor's wife paradigm that said, you need to be leading women's ministry and you need to be at every service doing your you be a good church member.
Right.
The expectation is be a good church member. And she's always been that.
Yeah. So in the early days, like when you were getting started, there's a legend man named Steve Taboo. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, you are. It looks like Tybo.
Tybo. I had to look it up. Tybo.
It looks like Tybo, but it is Taboo.
Taboo. He pastors a church in Cookville, and they were the ones who helped plant this church.
Yep.
Tell us about Steve.
So there were two things that happened. One, the local association here in Wilson County and in Lebanon said what they had said, which is, we've already got enough churches. Why do we need another church?
Right.
And then I was assigned to Steve as a church planting assessor. In other words, I had to go do an interview, Katrina and I both, with Steve, and his job, he was contracted from the Tennessee Baptist Convention to do interviews with potential church planters. And his assessment would be a determination of whether or not the convention would support financially the church plant.
Yeah.
So like he held all the cards. And so we drove to Cookville and went to go meet him. And we went upstairs into the little office where he was at. And he was the most down to earth, funny, country, just kind individual. And we started off the whole thing. Before we even said a word about church planting and the heart behind planting and all the things that they ask in the assessment, he said, tell me y'all's story. And of course, at that point in time,
right,
our story was we were knee deep in health issues with Caleb. And so I told him the story of our both coming to faith, our getting married, Caleb's surgical accident that had happened to him, and just where we were in the process of waiting for a kidney transplant. And he looked at me, I mean, he had tears in his eyes, and he was just like, are y'all crazy for wanting to plant a church? He's like, but I love crazy people like y'all.
Yeah.
And then he proceeded to do the church planting assessment, which engaged everything from Katrina's support to have I ever built anything before and started something that was successful,
right,
to all kinds of other questions like what's your giftings, what's your temperaments, all that thing. And then at the very end of the meeting, Steve said, okay, there's two things that I want to do. He says, one, I'm going to recommend you for being a church planter. And I want our church, The River, to be a sponsoring mother church to you guys.
That's awesome.
Because he also knew about what the local association had already said.
Right.
And I was blown away. I was like, that's unbelievable. The second thing he said was, and I personally want to go get tested to be a potential donor for your son.
It's incredible.
And it was unbelievable. We
Yeah.
essentially walked out of that meeting and we were like, what just happened?
Right.
We've got a guy who wants to be a supporter of the church, his church plant and partner behind our church. And this guy wants to go get tested. And I told Katrina, I remember saying, like, you watch, he'll be the match. Like, isn't that how God will work?
Yeah.
He'll be the match. And so we left there and he followed through on what he said. He did go and do all the testing.
There's more to the story, though. You got to tell the story. The rest of it, was he a match? How did that play out?
So he was a match. In fact, he came back as a perfect match. And we were like, holy moly. Like, again, this is only the kind of story that God can write.
Right.
But what we didn't realize is he was going to write even more of a story.
Yes.
And so Steve goes and does all of his tests. He's a match for Caleb. Well, at that point in time, Caleb still had to get bigger. He had to grow larger because he would be receiving an adult kidney, which is what every baby getting a transplant receives. They receive adult organs.
Yeah.
So he had to grow. He was tiny. So it was like, get him fattened up, get him big. We got to get him some height. We got to get him, ready to receive this big old adult male kidney.
Right.
And so time passed, and exposure to blood transfusions because of dialysis and all that stuff eventually systematically changed Caleb's blood components in chemistry. So when he finally got big enough and we didn't realize it, it was time to start the process of like, okay, it's time to start prepping for kidney transplant. And when they looked at Steve's blood and they looked at Caleb's, they were no longer matched up enough to be compatible for a transplant.
Yeah.
And we were obviously devastated. We were like, what in the world? Why would that happen? Like, why would he be a match only to not be able to give? And like, we were just so certain the Lord was in it, So we were disappointed. Now, crazy story is we're starting to run out of time for Caleb to get a transplant as it's becoming more and more dire. They retest everybody that had previously been tested. And Katrina comes back as a perfect match.
Yeah.
Which she had not been a match before.
Right.
So Katrina ends up being the donor. Well, fast forward the clock a couple years. And a family from the river moves from Cookeville to Wilson County and starts attending this brand new church that their church helped plant and sponsor, the Journey Church. This is early days. They start coming. And for several years, they are a part of the church. Well, the individual, John Gentry, needs a kidney transplant. And John gets tested. All the things are done. And somebody wants to be tested to see if he'll be a match. And he's already had his heart pricked once to be somebody that's open and willing to be a donor.
Right.
Steve Taboo is a perfect match for John Gentry and gives John his kidney and saves his life.
Dude.
And so the guy who helped plant our church, was willing to give my son a kidney, is tested only to turn up not being a match after blood changes with Caleb's transfusions, only for a member of a family that came from Steve's church, has been at TJC for most of its life, to then turn around and receive the transplant from Steve later. It's like only the sovereignty of God can write stories that weave together like that.
Yes. Incredible. So, all right, we're back to church. We needed to tell the story of Steve Taboo.
Steve Taboo is a legend.
Absolutely incredible.
He's a guy that most people have never heard of, and he has been responsible for planting more churches, sending more missionaries than most people in the entire American church. The guy is an absolute unit, and nobody knows about him.
Yes. So we're standing on his shoulders.
Yes.
And thanks for sharing that. So back to the church. At what point, so you're starting the church early days, at what point did you think, man, this might actually work? This thing might work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's two ways to answer that. I think one, I was always naive and dumb enough to never question that it would.
You've always been this optimistic, not even skeptically optimistic. It's like, it's going to happen. It's going to work.
I think I was just, and imagine 25-year-old Eric, right?
I can't.
So I was just naive enough to go, like, of course it's going to work. Yeah, of course it's going to. So I don't think I ever operated with maybe with a fear or trepidation that somehow or another, we were going to turn a corner and it was going to fail at some point.
Yeah.
But I think the moment I realized like, oh, this thing is getting some traction is we were in this small little building in 109 and we were at one service and then we went to 2 services, which again, didn't require a ton of people.
Right.
But
Right.
we were then starting to see those 2 services grow and we were like, we might not be able to live it in this little building very long.
Yeah.
And so that's when we started exploring, like, I think we got to move to a bigger space. And the conversation about going to West Elementary, moving a mile or 2 up the road to a school, from a permanent space to a school, because it would give us more room. That's when I knew, like, okay, that's a good sign. We're moving forward in a way that says this little building is not going to be able to contain what's going on here.
Okay. So in alignment with that, if you were to pan out a little bit and look at all of these 20 years, what are some checkpoints along the way where you felt like there was wind behind the sails pushing you to the next season? You're thinking like, these are monumental stages where you felt like, okay, God's breathing on us here. There's a lot of favor. There's a lot of grace. He's pushing us along. What are some of those?
It's a great question. You could mark these like chapters and seasons in many ways. I think you had that first, year and a half or 2 where we're in the old building and then that transition to West Elementary. That was a big season because it was a step of faith. It was going to require a lot of work of setting up and tearing down and moving into a school, which is just like never ideal.
Yeah.
But that was one of those moments where it's like, we're making a decision at this point to be proactive in reaching more people, right? So like this was a definitive, decisive moment. I would say a second one is when we made the move to our Leeville Pike building.
Yeah.
Because that was another one of those moments. A few years at West Elementary, and all of a sudden this big building is available in the heart of Lebanon, which, by the way, we start off on 109.
Right.
We move into the Mount Juliet city limits.
Yeah.
And then we move into the middle of Lebanon.
Yeah.
And that was a fearful thing because it's like we were about half and a half at that point. Half the people are coming from Mount Juliet, half are coming from Lebanon. This Lebanon space is going to cost us 4 times the amount of money that we were paying in rent. It would swallow us, and we don't know if we can afford it with the people that we have. And boy, we've got to win.
Yeah.
Like if we don't reach people, we're it's going to be rough.
Did you have a desire like early on where you wanted to land? Because if you're starting on 109, you're literally right between Mount Juliet and Lebanon. Did you have an idea of maybe landing in Mount Juliet or staying in Lebanon? Was there, or was it just like what's available?
I think we had a kind of an in-between mentality. Like, boy, it'd be great to be in between, which is why even West Elementary made sense because it's still
pretty in between.
It's still kind of in between. It's closer to 109, than maybe other options.
Yeah.
But honestly, in those early days, you're just scrapping. You're just trying to survive. You're just trying to take the next right step.
Yeah.
And so I would love to say we had some big plan and like master, blueprint of this would be the territory. We just knew like, hey, we're here in Wilson County.
Yeah.
And even reaching into periphery already with some folks from Hartsville or from Watertown. So we knew like we need to be in this area. But what makes sense for what we can afford and is maybe a shoe we could grow into a little bit.
Right.
And so we made the jump.
So you made the jump. Beyond that, what are a couple more like wind in the sail, like God's breathing some favor moments?
Yeah, I think, man, there's so many and so much of it. I could think about this in terms of transitions. I could think about this in terms of personnel.
Right.
I mean, I've told you before, I think your coming to TJC was a massive culture shaper in our worship gatherings, your leadership. I think somebody like Matt Espenshade has been something very similar for us in terms of just the amount of excellence and skill that he has brought to our team, not just from where he started on the elder team, but then somebody that joined our staff. Yeah. Another one would be two elders, Scott Marlowe and Chris Townsend, who's no longer here.
Yeah.
When they joined our elder team, like our elder team got better. We got wiser. We were making better decisions. Like Scott Marlowe and Chris were the ones that started helping us think about global missions and doing things outside of just our own focus here. So those were all massive things. And then obviously moving down the road a mile to, this current facility was massive. It was a massive moment, but you have to combine that with COVID. And, I think COVID was another decisive thing because our church stayed together. And in many ways, like we came out of COVID and grew. Yeah. And, it solidified for us even the courage to do things based on our conviction, not what was popular, convenient, or, whatever else. We weren't looking to run anybody else's play. I think we were the first to close and we were the first to reopen in this area. Yeah. Not because we wanted to be first, but because we were making independent decisions with conviction. Yeah. And that was because our elder team was growing stronger. Our staff was growing stronger. Moving here then just opened up possibilities for us. And so, you could talk about Hope Multiplied and how it was, so important to us. You could talk about the Arise Initiative and how it was so important. All of those, I would say, have just been these really important mile markers along the way. Right.
So one thing a lot of people may not know who have joined onto our church or started attending since 2020, because our church has doubled since then. Like we moved here and then it has doubled since then. And that was actually right after Caleb had passed. Yep. So for the first 15 of the 20 years of the church's life, Caleb was alive and you guys were going through it. You were in and out of the hospital. It seemed like a new deck of cards was being dealt to you guys each week, and you were just working
playing
through
the hand.
new things, and not, some of it was a brand new, like, I don't know, we've not done this before, and then others we're in the hospital for 2 more weeks because of pneumonia. How, and this feels maybe like a dumb question because obviously you were impacted by that, but how would you say Caleb's life impacted you and then the DNA of the church? The DNA of the church is obviously impacted by the leaders of the church, you being the one that planted the church, but you were impacted obviously by that. How has that, Caleb's life, shaped who you are and who we are as a church?
I mean, Caleb is probably the single most influential person in my life because of how I watched him suffer and stay faithful and stay joyful, to take it in stride. Yeah. And it taught me really quick how to put things in perspective for my own life, my own struggles, my own inconveniences. Yeah. And also too, just the love that I had for him, to want to care for him, to want to be there with him, to want to, like, you're not alone, buddy. Like, we're with you, And so, 15 years of his life paralleled with 15 years of this church's life. I just think the DNA of our church was one in which we just didn't put rose-colored glasses on life. Right. Not pessimistic by any means, not negative, not gloom and doom. Yeah. Hopeful sufferers. Right. Those who understand that trials and tribulations are real. This is not some kind of health, wealth, prosperity place. This is not some kind of place that just kind of tries to put a cheesy veneer over stuff like, it's Christian and happy, Yeah. It's like serious, substantive joy in the midst of serious, substantive pain and difficulty. Right. And learning to navigate how those things live together and how do we trust the Lord with all of our heart in the midst of those types of things. I think those have always been in the DNA of our church because I was having to live that out in my life, like not to teach anything, but just like for my own faith and family. Yeah. Living that out. And so, I think Caleb's life will be so much a part of like why our church is the way it is in terms of its realness, its rawness, its willingness to talk about the hard things and stare the hard things in the face. And to go maybe into those corners where a lot of churches don't go into theologically. And, and that was a result of not being able not to. Yeah. We couldn't avoid it. Yeah. Obviously in his passing, the church has been to our family in all of it. In the middle of it, in his worst sickness, in his passing, not only supportive, but there for us, encouraging to us, praying for us. When I was out with Caleb's stroke in October of 2017, the church grew by like 200 people.
Yeah.
In the 2 months that I wasn't even there.
You were officially gone.
I was not even there.
95 days.
I think I attended TJC one Sunday. Katrina came up and relieved me just so I could go just worship. And I hadn't been there in months. I met families who were like, hey, we're new here. We've been coming for 6 weeks and we've never met you. It was so bizarre, but it was also so amazing. The love, the support, and the fact that, this church is continuing to go forward because this church is not built on me. It's not built on Caleb. It's built on the mission of showing Jesus is incomparably glorious and living it out. And that, I think that's just hardwired now into the DNA of who we are.
Yeah. So go with me in the future. Your daughters have found men who you have approved of, which is a high approval. They have had their own children, and their children they have their own children. Okay, we're 3 generations down the line. Our church is at 50 years. What's the legacy of the Journey Church?
Faithfulness, conviction. I pray that it remains the kind of church that just radiates steadiness. A foundation that can't be moved, yet a warmth that can't be replicated. If I were to wave the magic wand and say, abracadabra, Lord, if you grant me one thing, this is what I pray, that our church would maintain that. 50 years from now, what we would be known for is, man, that church doesn't waver. They are steadfast in the truth. Their feet are firmly planted on rock. No wind easily blows them over. And yet there is no one more joyful, more warm. There is no place more welcoming than that. If we can hold that together, that is the secret sauce that distinguishes us from everybody.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for your endurance. Thank you for the vision and for just being obedient, because there are lives that you'll never meet and will never meet that are beyond this generation and the next that will be impacted because you were faithful. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
I say we chase after 20 more.
Here's to the
And
next
40
20
more.
Let's reap the harvest.
Let's do it.